So, without further ado, let's get into it. Like I said, firstly, I just want to apologise for all the technical issues and bits of noise you might have been hearing about trying to get audio working. We've just been having some technical hiccups, but you know, these things happen, and I want to give you a warm welcome again to Box of Niche. My name is Sejabut Kumaro. I am the host of Box of Niche, and this is where we just unbox niche topics, basically, which could be anything from TV to film to bits of history, a song, practically anything. I do hope you're well on this wonderful Friday. I am. I went to the theatre 2 days ago to see Midsummer Murders stage play. There's a stage play of Midsummer Murders now, which is a thing. But no, seriously, it was a really good time. It was just basically like the TV show and the book, and it just incorporated elements of theatre and other things, and it was just a wonderful time for me and just some nice quiet time to myself. But that aside, welcome to Box of Niche. This is the 5th episode of the show, so thank you for all your support and all your comments and everything else in between on this show. It's been absolutely fun doing all these topics and just seeing people just learning and being knowledgeable about certain topics, so to speak. Just learning things you just never knew, or maybe just learning things you vaguely know but do know more now in a more deeper context. So, with all that pre-ramble amble out of the way, today I wanted to talk about HMS Anderson. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, what on earth is HMS Anderson? Well, cast your minds back to World War II. One of the key parts of World War II is, of course, the code-breaking stations. The most notable code-breaking station is, of course, Bletchley Park, which is where they cracked the Nazis' code, basically. Of course, Alan Turing was working up there, and this was in England, and they just, as I said, cracked Nazi codes and secret codes to basically beat the Nazis, of course, in World War II. But, sorry, do beg pardon, I've had a really heavy lunch, but anyway, yes. But apart from Bletchley Park, of course, which was decoding the Nazi signals in England, there was, of course, the outside element. There were other code-breaking stations moved from different countries to help battle other things, such as, of course, the Japanese, who were on the side of the Nazis at this time, who were not that far from, of course, other parts of Asia, which happened to be under the British Empire at the time, like India, of course. Now, this was under the this all came under the Far East Combined Bureau, FECB for short. This was an outstation of the British Government Code and Cipher School, which was first set up in Hong Kong in March 1935 to monitor Japanese and also Chinese and Russian, aka Soviet intelligence and radio traffic. It was later moved to Singapore, and then it was moved to Colombo in Ceylon, which was the British term for Sri Lanka. We don't call it Ceylon anymore, of course. As I said, we just call it Sri Lanka, and I do find it odd that people still use that term. I mean, nothing against it. I'm not like, oh my god, I'm gonna lose my mind, this is an insult to my ancestors, that kind of thing. But I do just find it interesting. I've noticed that in Bromley there's a restaurant called Chef Copper Ceylon, and I noticed some other things that said Ceylon, and maybe I'm just making a hullabaloo about it, but I do just find it quite interesting that people still use the term Ceylon. Maybe they are unaware of the context, but I would just call it Sri Lanka nowadays, like a Sri Lankan restaurant or something relating to the deep culture of Sri Lanka rather than just calling it Ceylon. But that's just my opinion, to be honest. Maybe I'm completely wrong and everyone wants to call it Ceylon and there's no harm in calling it that still, but I digress. Then it was moved to Kilindai in Kenya. Apologies if I butchered that. I am very terrible at country pronunciations. And then, of course, it came back to Colombo in Sri Lanka. Now, the Colombo site, as I said, it was known as HMS Anderson or Station Anderson. Now, firstly, it was in Hong Kong. It was in an office block in a naval dockyard with an armed guard at the door. There was an intercept site on the Stonecutters Island, not far from 4 miles across from the harbour. It was staffed by a dozen RAF and Royal Navy ratings plus Army signallers. And the codebreaking or Y section had Japanese, Chinese and Russian interpreters under the Royal Navy Paymaster Henry Shaw, with Dick Thatcher and Neil Barnum. And the FECB was headed by Chief Intelligence Staff Captain Josh Waller and later Captain F.J. Wiley. And they've been dealing with direct things in Shanghai as well. And eventually they moved towards Singapore in August 1939, shortly before the outbreak of war with Germany, and the FCB moved to Singapore on the HMS Birmingham ship for the fear of a Japanese attack. There was a skeleton staff of a codebreaker. 4 interceptors were left at Hong Kong, and they were captured by the Japanese in 1941. And the FECB went to the Selector Naval Base and Intercept Station in Kranji, an RAF Y Interception Unit 52 wireless unit then arrived in Singapore in early November 1941. And as for Bletchley Park, that was of course concerning German insignia ciphers, but many in the naval section in Hot 7, which was coordinating with the FCB, that Japanese naval section moved to Singapore, and then by 1940 there were roughly 40 people working solely on the JM50, 25 who could read simple messages. And of course the code book, the JB25, was introduced on the 1st of December 1940, but was broken immediately as additives had not been changed. And then skipping ahead, of course, to the first time they went to Sri Lanka, Colombo in Sri Lanka. With the Japanese advancing on the Malay Peninsula, the Army and the RAF codebreakers then went to the Wireless Experimental Centre in Delhi, India first. Now, the Royal Navy codebreakers went to Colombo in Sri Lanka in January 1952 on the troop ship HMS Devonshire with 12 codebreakers cars as deck cargo in Pembroke College, which was an Indian boys' school, and was requisitioned as a combined code-breaking and wireless interception centre. The FCB then worked for Admiral Sir James Somerville in Commander-in-Chief in the Royal Navy's Eastern Fleet. Initially, the Bureau wanted to move to Australia, but was reportedly told by the Director of Signal Communication, Lieutenant Commander Jack B. Newham, that facilities were not available. And many have since been baffled why they were told that, though Newman had no intention of letting the British arrive and run the show, and they wanted to command all Australian interception stations for their own use. Now, when you come to Kalinda, Kenya, the Royal Navy codebreakers in April 1942, they moved to Kilindai near Mombasa in Kenya because of the Japanese task force on the attack on Colombo. 2 codebreakers and the civilian wireless operator were left in Colombo, and an Indian boys' school at Aldina were about a mile outside Mombasa and overlooking the Indian Ocean was also requisitioned, hence the name HMS Aldina. Radio reception was even worse at Colombo, with only the strongest Japanese signals received in addition. In in addition to the FRUMLE, the US Australian British US branch unit based in Melbourne that replaced CAST and was reluctant to exchange material. The American commander Ruth Fabian was a difficult man to work with and was prejudiced against the British and had a personal clash with Eric Nave. Although Nave was Australian, he was, of course, a Royal Navy officer. There were complaints about Fabian and Frummel from MacArthur's headquarters, although MacArthur was not particularly concerned. But in September 1942, Colombo was able to break the Japanese merchant shipping code because there was a message sent twice with extra data. It was a transition cipher, not a super encoded cipher like the JN25. They also broke the JM152, which was a simple transposition substitution cipher for navigation warnings, and they previously impenetrable JN167, another merchant shipping cipher. These successfully enabled the Allied forces to attack Japanese supply ships, and this resulted in the Japanese merchant marine suffering 90% losses by 1945. But soon they returned back to Colombo. The FCB then moved back to Colombo. The move began in August 1943 with the Advance Party arriving in Ceylon on September the 1st. 8 Wren Typex operators were killed on February 1945, when their ship, the Khalif Insamal, en route from Kenya to Ceylon, was sunk by a Japanese submarine. The location was chosen for this new base was the Anderson Golf Course, 6 miles from the Colombo HQ, and this is why it's called the HMS Anderson. Now, Bruce Keith wanted to set up up-and-country site for better reception, but the Chief of Intelligence for HQ of the Eastern Fleet insisted that codebreakers should be in easy reach of headquarters. While reception was better at Kalundi, it was affected by a 303 kV power line and the racecourse aerodrome. Now, unfortunately, government details on this is quite sketchy, but I've managed to get some details from bits and pieces. So the stuff I gave you was basically the keynotes, or just basically the gist of how HMS Anderson came about and some of the stuff it did. But I've also managed to acquire some stuff that might be that will be of interest on this as well. So coming back to the Pembroke to Kenya. When the Japanese attacked Damara at the end of 1941, the British thought it would be prudent to withdraw its air and military intelligence units of the FCC going into New Delhi and the naval ones in Colombo. So the FCB evacuated the staff from Singapore, and they arrived in Colombo in 1942, and they were accommodated in hotels and offices and hostels along with other ranks and women. Operating as captain on staff, HMS Lanka, they established their radio interception and decryption centre at Pembroke, which was, of course, Pembroke Academy, with a private crime shop in Flower Road, which closed in 1978. Now, the radio arrow was attached on top of these trees in a Hollerith machine, which is basically a electromagnetic predecessor of the electric computer, basically using punch cards. This was evacuated from Singapore, which aided them in their efforts. Now, the code breakers soon deciphered a Japanese message which indicated that the Imperial Navy would attack Colombo in early April. This enabled the British to withdraw a bulk of their fleet from Turumankai to Adio Atoll in the Maldives. Nevertheless, there was skepticism about the codebreakers' abilities, which caused the loss of several ships, including the HMS Craft carriers Hermes and the cruisers the Cornwall and the Dorset. As a result of a Japanese raid on Sri Lanka, the British evacuated from SCB to Kenya, where they were set up in Kalundi. However, though, a few codebreakers were left at the Pembroke facility, and they played a vital role in the Japanese defeat at the Battle of Midway in June. Now, coming on to Bletchley Park and the FCB, itself. Basically, in 1999, the government merged its Army and Navy signals, which gave the cover name the Government Code and Cipher School, and was basically the ancestor to what we know nowadays as the Government Communications HQ, GCHQ. 20 years after its formation, the most famous, of course, code addressing code breaking was, of course, Bletchley Park, and the staff at Bletchley Park deployed to several wooden outhouses and broke the Nazi wartime codes of wartime and Lorenz. And to deal with the latter, deployed GC and CS deployed to the world's. They deployed the world's first electronic computer, which was the Colossus series. And in the 1920s, they started breaking Japanese code. And in 1935, the signal interception and the code branch breaking was in Hong Kong. And the Far East Bureau was born. And this is what led to basically them coming to HMS Anderson. Now, it's also worth noting, of course, they had a Hot 7 in Bletchley Park, which helped them get information back to Bletchley Park from wherever the FCB is. Now, it should be worth noting, of course, as mentioned, the FCB, when they settled on HMS Anderson, it was, of course, the Anderson Golf Links. Now, this was in Narapata, which was Colombo's third golf course, and this was here where they built the first purpose-built signaling facility in the east, and it also served as a direction-finding facility for the Navy. And apart from the naval staff, HMS Anderson also had 190 personnel, RAF personnel, to provide small wire parties consisting of computers and telegraphists to be deployed in ships to give warnings of attack. Now, this all happened in August 1943 when as mentioned, the FCB went back from Colombo to Colombo. Its head was the commander by the name of William Bruce Keith, a veteran of Bletchley Park, and he wanted to go up country, but the Navy insisted that the unit should be within easy reach of the Colombo Navy HQ, and this foiled this intention. Instead, it settled, of course, on the Anderson Golf Links course. And as mentioned, this was the third golf course. There were two others, the Royal Colombo's Golf Course in Ridgeway Links in Borrella, and the Lady Golf Links in Cinnamon Gardens. Now, as mentioned, this was the first purpose-built signaling facility in the East, and it also, of course, was a direction finder for the Royal Navy. And sooner or later, this grew into the main British radio listening station and cryptanalysis centre outside Britain. The British also maintained a joint signaling centre at Pridonia attached to the South East Asian Command, and DF stations on Powder Island, Tromoli and Hambota. And at this place, there was a separate parallel to the main building which housed a horror machine. And the Anderson site also had main radio receivers, employed 100 receiving bays in the main room, monitoring communications between key Japanese bases in Southeast Asia, with each operator being given a single Japanese channel to cover. However, though, outward communication took via external transmitting stations, such as the Royal Air Force's signals at Gawada, which is now the current site of the University of Sri Jaraponda. Communication between Napata and transmitters took place via landlines. However, though, locals took to steel and copper, which caused frequent shutdowns, which as a result was eventually solved by introducing a microwave link. Now, the signals station in Ceylon, inside HMS Anderson, this was responsible for collecting naval intelligence in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Since it had few agents in the practice of gathering this intelligence, it was limited to radio direction finding and an attempt to crypt signals. As for staff, the base employed at least 1,280 large staff by 1944, with a planned expansion of 1,700. A few of those are civilians. Apart from naval staff, they had 190 RAF personnel, They also had several hundred Wrens, which is the Women's Royal Naval Service, which operated the horror machine, as well as intercept operators, traffic analysts, ciphers, strippers, and signal type identifiers and clerical staff. Now, these personnel mainly found accommodation outside the base. The Wrens billeted at the St. Peter's College at Kent House in Flower Road, which was mainly in badly lit and ventilated cauldron huts known as bandas. Despite the housing situation, the staff did enjoy themselves, relishing of a range of foods that were unavailable back home, swimming at Mountain Lavada or Garafance, and enjoying an exotic nightlife. Colombo had one nightclub, which was the Silver Fawn, nicknamed the Silver Prawn, but other ranks preferred a house nearby where the ladies served tea, cakes, and cool drinks and banana fritters. And entertainment was provided by an in-house concert party called the Anderson Players. Keith wanted to encourage a more relaxed atmosphere than on usual naval bases, stemming from his experience and time at Bletchley Park. Commander J.E. Poulton, who served Keith's deputy, later went on to serve as the director of Australia Defence Signal Bureau, and other people who were working there. John Silken, he was later a cabinet minister for the Labour Party. He served as HMS linguist, and others worked there include two naval telegraphists, D. O'Reilly and F.C. Murphy, who wrote for to the left-wing Tribune opposing British intervention against the fledgling Republic of Indonesia. Now, as a precaution against the anti-British agitation, which occurred around time Sri Lanka, which gained dominant status in 1948, the British deployed Marines and sailors from a cruiser in Colombo Harbour to defend HMS Anderson and its staff billets. They kept the government of Sri Lanka in the dark about the true nature of HMS Anderson, making out it was simply a communications relay station. In 1955, however, the government informed the British that they wanted to redevelop the Anderson Golf Links, which had the Anderson Flats later built there, and they asked to remove HMS Anderson from the site. British officials agreed, since they believed, and correctly they did, that the real purpose of the installation could be hidden at a new site. However, finding one proved difficult, as they planned on an upgraded facility capable of receiving signals from all bearings, which necessitated 400 acres of land to accommodate radio aerial farms. Furthermore, the site could not be too remote, but at the same time it needed to be isolated from interference from highways, towns and naval movements. Now, accordingly, by 1952, officials of Admiralty and GCHQ, they agreed to build the brand new purpose signal facility with the capability of expanding rapidly in wartime at peak hour. But in 1954, after building the cost of $2 million, which is 10 billion today in RS, to construct it, they shifted operations from HMS Anderson to Picard again, and they used it as a relay station cover story in the government. However, though, external events put to pay up the new base led to this station slowly shutting down. As you see, in 1946, Britain and France collude with Israel and attacked and captured the Suez Canal zone in the Middle East, recently nationalised by Egypt, causing uproar, and the government of Sri Lanka, convinced that ships used in the operation had been refuelling at Sri Lankan ports, asked the British government to provide a timetable of removing their bases. Now, the British, caught flat-footed, stalled for time, suggesting that the base facilities remained, disguised as civilian installations with service personnel dressed in mufti. However, though, the Prime Minister, SWRD Bankanaye, would have nothing of it, and insisted that the British would leave, however dressed. Ultimately, the two sides reached a compromise, and the base would be removed gradually over 5 years, and the Royal Navy gave up its base at Trinco in 1958 and retained its two Navy's signals stations at Walasa and Kotori, lumped together as the Ceylon West stations and Picard as well. But in 1962, the Royal Navy handed these sites over to the Royal Ceylon Navy, which almost had no signaling capability, which abandoned Picard. Now, a writer visited Picard in the 1970s and found a large building with thick concrete walls occupying its centre. It's obviously missed occupation for many years, and it reeked and was in a massive state of disrepair. So that's as much as we know about HMS Anderson. But I have found some interesting things, other interesting things as well. For example, Cliff Dennison joined the the Royal Navy in July 1943, and after his basic training at HMS Royal Arthur, he completed his specialist training at the Royal Navy Wireless Telegraphy School in Brighton. He was then drafted to HMS Anderson in Ceylon, sited at Napatha Golf Course. Of course, Colombo was as mentioned, the main British listening station and the cryptanalysis centre outside Britain. So this was his account of a small detail of his account of his time there. The title read, "Drafted Overseas, Ceylon Intercepting Japanese Communication Stations." Luckily for me, it was not long before our group was posted. Some received draft to ships, others to Russia, and the rest of us, including me, to Sri Lanka, Ceylon. But for some reason, we found ourselves at a camp in Cookenham Wood, Worcestershire, where I learned how to peel potatoes, wash up, and keep sentry watches. It was on one of those watches in the night of June 12th, 1944, on top of the armoury with a tripod-mounted machine gun for company, that the sound of a motor was heard going overhead. This proved to be the first of the many V1 doodlebugs that night. With us not knowing what they were hearing in the distance, the motors stopped with explosions to follow. Come daybreak, we were able to see these intruders, but could do nothing about them. I was given a few days in Bonkshan leave before being sent by rail to Greencock to join HMS Tide for a passage to Ceylon, and on the HMS Anderson as a telegraphist. In HMS Anderson, we were kept busy intercepting Japanese coded Morse traffic in company with the compliant of the WRNS, which was part of our watch, and possibly these were the decoders. On completion of a message, they would collect it, do what they had to, and that was it. Normal naval watches were order of the day. It was not all work. We had some time ashore swimming at Gulf Fast Beach and Mount Lavia with the odd run to Colombo. The Fleet Club was out of bounds to us, so we had our own venue, a kind of junior run by a group of ladies who made us most welcome and served us tea, cakes, cool drinks, and a load of fried bananas. A large house not far from our base, so this became home from home, and it was used most days. Having just remembered one of our wrens on our watch, who was Gwen. She had tight curly hair, and she was out with one of our lads. Her home was in Derby. I just wish I could remember all their names as well. I can remember their faces. There was something unforgettable, and that was the 45 record of Frank Sinatra singing with Harry James Orchestra, Little Street in Singapore, and how many of them left us remembering that. It was played over and over again on the bass system. The skipper in Anderson was Captain Keith. Jimmy was a Lieutenant Commander Duggamore, and a Lieutenant Gibbons, who was in charge of a sport. I do have a picture of him kicking off a fancy dress football match at our celebration at the end of hostilities in Europe. So that was one of the accounts we could find about someone's experience there. Now there was another person. His name was Martin Sharman. He had some family members who were at HMS Anderson and worked there. And this was his account from what he's been told from his family. On the 5th of January 1942, the naval section of the FCB was evacuated from Singapore, with the loss of much equipment, including the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs Type B cipher machine and all of its documentation. The FCB effectively dissolved from that moment, and the loss of documents has helped wipe a few achievements from memory. In January 1943, about half of the former FCB naval staff reassembled at its new headquarters in the Anderson Golf Course just outside Colombo. It took the name of HMS Anderson, and they were joined by a fledgling group of cryptanalysts fresh from training at Bletchley Park, among of whom was my father. The other half of the FCB was established at the Adelina School in Kilindai outside Mombasa, becoming HMS Alderney. In the autumn of that year, Hut 7 in Bletchley Park was given more time on Block C hull running equipment to work on Japanese Navy material. In September, the cryptanalysts based in Colombo were moved to HMS Anderson, where they were joined by more cryptologists from the UK and by the WRNS, responsible for radio direction finding. The RNS had been instructed to tell anyone who asked what they were doing, and that they were engaged in radio detection of blood stains. My father served as a cryptanalyst at HMS Anderson from the time it opened to the time he and the other cryptanalysts were evacuated back to Kilindai in Kenya. It was in Ceylon that he met both my mother to be and one of the Wrens stationed at HMS Anderson, and Charles Baldwin, an interpreter who later became my uncle, marrying my mother's sister, Jean. This was the account from Martin Sharman of what he was told from his family that worked there. Really fascinatingly nice story there. It's also worth noting about Hut 7. Hut 7 was a wartime section of the Cipher School at Bletchley Park. This was, of course, to deal with the Japanese naval codes, and it supplied the cryptanalysts and linguists to Bletchley's front line in the Far East, with Hong Kong, then Singapore, then, of course, the Anderson Station. So that was as much as I could find. I thought this was a really fascinating tale, because I will be honest, I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know much about my culture, but I am willing to embrace and open to understanding my culture as much as I can and learning more about it, finding out more about it, because even though I was born in Britain and of course growing up with in a British life and British culture, so to speak, my Sri Lankan heritage from my parents and my family and the people before them and the people before them is just as important, because it's where I'm basically technically where I'm from, and I wouldn't be here without my without my parents, of course. I always remember how they would talk about various different memories in Sri Lanka and their time there before they unfortunately had to leave after due to the civil war there. So when I found out that there was a code-breaking station in Colombo, I was quite surprised. I thought, wow, okay, I didn't know that. I only knew about the code-breaking station in Bletchley Park, but no, there was this other station that was moving around to different countries to basically decrypt secret codes from the East to stop the enemy, and I thought that was really fascinating, and I think it just goes to show you just never know what you'll find in history. History changes a lot, and sometimes it gets to a point where it changes so much that other things get buried, and as we can see, there's not much about HMS Anderson or anything else. Everyone always talks about Bletchley Park, and there's even like a couple of films, but no one talks about the Far East Combined Bureau and their efforts. They've done wonderful things to help the war effort from their end of things, I'd say. But yeah, coming back to me, I've been learning a lot of things about my culture, and I've just learned to appreciate and understand how important it is. And I think it just goes to show that even someone like me who doesn't know much about that culture, it's never too late, and don't be afraid to, because you'll learn so many important things and understand so much and give so much respect to the culture and also to history itself, I would say as well, because learning about hidden bits of history or history that's just been long forgotten just allows you to respect it more and realize that there is a lot of history out there that we just don't know about. And I think for me personally, on a more personal note, as mentioned, my parents were from Sri Lanka, I think it's also quite touching or quite personal to learn about something like this from my parents' home country, because this was a key part of the war happening in what basically where my parents in the country that my parents grew up and lived on. And I think that's just wonderful. I do like learning about some parts of my parents' culture, even if I don't understand it half the time. I do my best to try and understand and make sure I never forget about it, really. And I think coming to the end of it, I would say it's quite sad how, as mentioned, these things tend to be forgotten, because whenever people talk about World War One or World War Two, particularly in this country, we always talk about the soldiers from Britain. We always talk about how they fought and how hard they fought on the front line. And while that is true, I think it is easy to forget that there were other people fighting alongside the British, both in World War One and World War Two. As we can see here, as mentioned, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Hong Kong, they all helped out in their own way. And I think it is a real shame when people just have that mentality when they say, oh, it's the British. The British fought hard and strong against the enemy. And, well, yeah, that's true. It's worth noting that there were Commonwealth and countries from the Empire who were fighting alongside them to hold the flag, basically, and hold the line. And they should never be forgotten, and they never should. But on that on that note, I do hope you have a good afternoon, and wherever you are, never forget where you came from, never forget history, that's just been long and buried, and go and seek out history. Actually, go and read some books, go online and find out something. If you have a question like about a certain topic in history, just go for it. Go and look it up online, and it will just lead you down this path like I did. Like, I saw the words HMS Anderson Colombo, and then I just went down this path, and now here I am just doing this show. So yeah, I can say I am happy that I just learned about something so important and so key to world history. And you never know, you might find something important that's important to key world history. So on that note, I bid you farewell, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on the 5th episode of Box of Niche. It has been a great journey so far, just basically picking up these niche topics and just talking about them in great detail. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I just hope I can do many more episodes. So, on that note, this is Sejum Takamura signing off, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.